So, first of all, like, can you introduce yourself for the audience?
Yeah, definitely. My name is Krysten McCaughey. I am a sports performance dietitian. I currently work for Exos. I worked for USC in the past. Have worked on a couple different, pro and collegiate contracts here and there. So mainly focus on sports nutrition.
Cool. So, what exactly is different with like sports nutrition and or like performance dietitian?
Mhm.
How is it like different with other dietitian?
Yeah, that's a super good question. So sports dietitians, typically we like focus mainly on nutrition for sports performance. So getting really specific with how much food people are intaking, their macronutrient breakdown. So the kind of the combination of protein, carbs, fats, to really make sure that they're fueling for performance and also recovering from their workout sessions. And then getting really, really strategic with their pre, during, and post-workout nutrition, just to help them, again, get them energy throughout their workout and then helping them recover from the workouts. So just basically applying nutrition concepts, but strategically to fuel performance versus other areas of nutrition could be like clinical dietitian or outpatient, school districts. So just different things that can be applied, but this one's very specific for that sport performance.
Cool. So, how exactly do you think how important does it means to athlete to like get the right food in their body?
I think it's super important. I'm a little biased since it's what I do, but I think especially the higher the level, right? We're looking for that really, really small difference at that point. So it's kind of I like the saying, it can take a good athlete to a great athlete or a great athlete to a good athlete, right? So I think nutrition is one of those things that not everybody's doing yet. So it can really play a difference in terms of performance, as well as like longevity of the career. So making sure that we're fueling properly, recovering properly is going to help somebody have a longer career than somebody who may not be fueling like that. We see that a lot in like injury recovery. Nutrition can really support like the speed of injury recovery, and how completely they recover from a certain injury. So definitely plays a huge role. I think it's one of the more underutilized tools that they can use for sports performance, but definitely a big one, just because it's, we're putting food into our body all day, every day. So we want to make sure that we're really capitalizing on that, to support that, training session or physical therapy or whatever they're doing.
So, working at Exos, and you mentioned that you work with the NFL Combine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean like you have to like plan out their meals, like breakfast and like after training or before training and like lunch and dinner, that kind of stuff?
Yeah. Yeah. So each athlete that comes in for that program will get a full evaluation. So meet with all the different practitioners, but nutrition as well. And we'll do a full eval. So we'll kind of assess body composition, see where they're at with that. And then depending on their position, we can kind of get, and their goals, we can kind of get a little bit strategic with what the goal is for body composition. And then we design a program that's just customized for that particular athlete for all of Combine. And that's going to adjust, right, as we go through the program, because the training is going to adjust. So we want to match their nutrition with their training, and make sure they're progressing towards their goals. So we basically customize breakfast, lunch, dinner, their post-workout shakes, and then advise them kind of on what to have if they're going to have a nighttime snack. So everything is going to be customized for that. And then with Exos, they get meals provided. So it's really easy because we can communicate with the food vendor, or the kitchen staff, and just make sure like, hey, this is what this guy needs. And they'll portion everything out for them. So it takes out, that part of the work on them. But obviously once they leave the facility, then they have a little bit more work to do on their own. So we want to make sure we're educating them on top of that, just so that when they leave, they can continue to try to fuel their body on their own.
Love that. Love that. I've been to Exos, so I ate their food over there. It's
Yeah.
good, but
So
I'm gonna ask a stupid question. What if like after I ate the meal, but I still feel like hungry?
that's a good question. So that happens sometimes. And typically, like, we as dietitians want the athletes to tell us like feedback like that. Just because nutrition isn't a perfect science. So sometimes we need to adjust on our end, but then other times, if somebody needs to cut a lot of weight in a short period of time, which isn't going to be ideal in terms of like a health standpoint, but sometimes we have to meet a certain goal by a certain time. So if that's the case, there's different strategies we can implement to try to help with that, because we don't want them to feel hungry all day. So sometimes we can move food around from different times of the day to other times of the day, or we can just add different things in that are going to help with that feeling of fullness for them, because definitely we don't want them to feel like that all day long. That's a tough feeling for a
Yeah.
long period of time.
So, uh, at the beginning of the combine, you mentioned that there's gonna be evaluation. So
Yeah.
besides body composition, is
Mhm.
there the other like eval you're gonna do or you're gonna be looking to?
Yeah. So there's the physical therapists do their whole evaluation, the performance coaches do their whole evaluation. So they're doing like ball jump testing, force plates, all that kind of stuff. From a nutrition standpoint, we do the main ones, the DEXA. So we use Hologic DEXA machines to test their body composition. And then we are partnered with an app called Zone In. And so that's how we do our evaluation process. We have our whole eval on there. And that app is where we can give the athletes their meal plan through. And then they can also do all their food ordering through there. And then there's another add-on test that we can do if we feel like it's something that's warranted. If an athlete's telling us certain things that might make us want to test other things, we can do what's called an Excella test. It's a little blood test. It's a finger prick. And it looks at different gut metabolites to see how their body is responding to like their training load, their sleep, if caffeine habits, what they're eating. So we can kind of look at the different metabolites that can point us, if they're out of range, it can point us different directions in terms of like, hey, this might not be working so well for you, or this is working and that's not. So it can lead us to different things that we can do to really dial in their nutrition, which is really nice.
So does a blood test I'm sorry, is it like must take it or
No, well, we'll just recommend that for certain
okay.
guys. Not everyone will do that. If they're feeling totally fine and everything's going well, then we don't want to have extra blood tests if we don't need them. But that's definitely one that's super helpful if there is stuff going on that we're not really sure why. It helps us kind of figure it out.
Okay, cool. So
Yeah.
uh in the NFL combine it's like a 8 week or like 10 or like 12 week, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's gonna be like different phases of the training, probably like max strength or probably like explosive power,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So when the phases or the main goal of the training changes, how do you guys change the dietitian?
Sure. It's a good question. So as the phases training, and this is, given that an athlete's fully healthy, if they have any restrictions from physical therapy or anything like that, then we adjust according to that as well. But if they're fully healthy, then according to the training phases, the coaches are great about telling us when they're changing phases so that we can adjust their nutrition accordingly. So kind of just broad general concepts behind that, like the higher the intensity, the higher the load, the longer the duration of training, typically the higher their needs go, and especially from carbs. So carbs are going to be like the main source of fuel for exercise. So anytime we increase that training, we want to make sure that we're increasing their nutrition as well to help fuel them through those sessions and also recover from them. So the recovery is a big one, I think, that nutrition will help with. That if they're training that hard day after day and they have multiple sessions a day, making sure that we're getting them enough and the right fuel to make sure that they can turn around and do it again. Otherwise, you know, if they're just kind of breaking themselves down further and further, it's going to be pretty hard to kind of like rebuild at the end of that. So we want to make sure every day they're getting everything that they need, and the right foods, right? So certain phases, we want to make sure we're focusing a little bit more on those like more anti-inflammatory foods to help with recovery. And then again, getting them enough nutrition to recover.
Cool. So, we we focusing on like NFL combine. So these are the athletes that are very explosive, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for these athletes, like, is it like uh how many like protein should they be taking for a day, and like also how many carbs?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, like very, very dependent and individualized based on size and their goals and all of that. But kind of general rule of thumb, typically with these athletes, we'll go closer to 1 gram per pound of body weight. So if they weigh 200 pounds, trying to get about 200 grams of protein per day. And then carbs are going to be the one that fluctuates even more so, because again, the carbs are going to be depending on how hard their training is, how many times they're training a day, if they're doing extra position work. And then if we have a body composition goal, that's also going to factor in. But typically, I would say like the most common carb range that we give is from like 3 to 5 grams per kilogram. So that's kind of the typical range for those athletes. You know, if they're super lean and they're training really hard, we might go higher. If they're more of like a wanting to lose body fat and maybe they're not training as much, or they're injured and have some restrictions, then we might go a little closer to that like 3 for the carbs. But I would say those are kind of our general rules of thumbs for those nutrients. And then we'll just kind of flex per guy based on what we're looking to do.
Cool. So, you mentioned that if those guys want to lose weight, you're probably going to reduce a little bit of the carbs.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean you're going to increase a little bit of the protein intake?
A little bit of protein and fat. So typically protein will still usually stick to around that 1 gram per pound. Sometimes we might go a little bit above it. But sometimes we don't want to go too high on protein, because then that will either get stored as fat or it can actually get burned as fuel. But there's it creates like a waste product that has to get excreted when you burn protein as fuel. So that sometimes can add to dehydration. So we definitely don't want that happening when they're doing like top end speed work. So typically fat and carbs typically will kind of like if carbs are higher, fat will be a little bit lower and vice versa. So we'll usually fill it in a little bit with fat. But again, we want to make sure that we're not giving them too much fat, because again, that can cause some issues too if we're giving them too high of fat, especially around their training times.
Cool. You mentioned that you don't want to like increase too much intake of protein during their max velocity work.
Yeah.
Does that mean that, because I know at Exos they have like different theme with different days throughout the week, right? There's probably
Okay.
like acceleration day, there's like max speed, there's like multi-directional. Does that
Sure.
mean like changes of the theme, you also change their like food intake?
That's a great question. So we actually, with the Zone In app, we were able to do that, which is really cool because we were able to communicate that with the kitchen. It was a little bit harder for the guys to follow, just because it would change their goals every day, right? So if they're trying to do it on their own, it's a little bit trickier. So if that's the case, then we'll usually go by phases. So if they're doing, you know, max speed, max strength phases, then we'll kind of change it for that. But with the Zone In app, we were able to do that. So we want to make sure, yeah, the day before and the day of their max speed work, we want to make sure that we're really focusing on meeting their carb needs, and the protein's going to be within that range, and not too high, just to make sure. But we also do hydration testing. So we do that usually Monday and Tuesday before their max speed work on Wednesday, to just make sure that we're preventing any like dehydration going into that. So we're just at least reducing that risk right off the bat.
Cool. So besides like carbs and like protein and fat, is there anything else you're gonna you like you guys want to like put in their meal or like their daily nutrition?
Yeah. So typically, I mean, the main thing with their food is we want to make sure that they're getting a variety of different things just because of the micronutrients, right? Micronutrients are hard because we only need them in smaller amounts, but if we're eating the same thing day and day and day and day, we're getting the same micronutrients, right? So we might be missing out on certain things. So we just want to make sure that they're getting a variety of different foods to make sure that they're meeting all their micronutrient needs. The other thing we typically do is we can supplement with some certain like sports specific supplements. So we supplement with those. And then we also at Exos are partnered with the Feed, which is a supplement company that offers a wide variety of different supplement brands and things like that. So each athlete that comes to Exos will get a customized box, like a 28-day supply that they can like auto renew if they want to, but we can customize that as well based on like some questions that we'll ask them. You know, if they've ever tested deficient in vitamin D, we can add in a vitamin D supplement. That's kind of a more common one. If they're struggling with sleep, we might add in some magnesium. So there's different things that we can get strategic with, adding in some extra there. But I think the main thing is just making sure that they're getting a variety of different foods, which is easy when you have the kitchen right there providing the meals. But you know, when people are on their own, it's a little bit harder just with if they're meal prepping or things like that. I usually just say like change it week to week, you know, change up what you're doing just so you can get the variety in.
Hey, so how exactly do you like educate your athletes to like probably to like eat the right stuff when they're on their own?
Yes, that is a tough one. Sometimes easier than others, but typically, you know, we just educate on the importance of nutrition and the role it has in performance, right? So just talking about kind of what we discussed earlier in terms of it being fuel for their performance, super important for their recovery. If they're looking to build or maintain muscle, it's going to play a role in that. So just making sure that they're understanding the why behind everything that we're doing usually helps with compliance on their own, just because if they understand why they're doing it, usually then they're like, and it makes sense to them and it actually matters to them, then we'll see them do that. So, you know, I think a really common goal with athletes is like either gain or maintain their muscle mass, sometimes wanting to cut fat at the same time. So post-workout nutrition is a huge one for that. So making sure that they're getting enough protein and carbs after the workout. A common misconception is like, oh, I'm just going to have protein powder with water and like leave out the carbs, because a lot of times people think like carbs equal I'm not going to be able to cut fat. So just explaining to them like you need the carbs because the body's first priority after a workout is to replace the energy stores in your body, which comes from carbs. And then second priority is actually the muscle building. So if they just have protein, then, you know, the body's going to take some of that protein and replace the energy stores. So you're going to have less left to repair and rebuild the muscles. So that usually, once they understand that, they're like, okay, cool. I'm always going to add carbs after a workout with my protein, because then they get why they're doing it, right? And they know that it's actually going to help them towards their goal versus, you know, it working against them. So I think just understanding the why is the biggest part.
So, in the mentorship that they teach us like for their meal they have like different colors of food in it. Is it the
Yeah.
same with athletes?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, similar to that like variety idea, right? So even just like fruits and vegetables, the different colors of the fruits and vegetables are given to them by like the phytochemicals in the fruits and vegetables. So making sure that we're getting a variety of different colors, make sure that we're getting a variety of those phytochemicals that all support different systems in the body. So we want to make sure we're getting all of those colors to really like support every system in the body and not just kind of focus in on one, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So we've been talking about like explosive, like those guys with like need speed and power. But how about like endurance athletes? Is their food intake going to be different with it?
Yeah, definitely. So endurance athletes are going to be a lot more carb focused because they're going to need that carb stores, and then also probably intaking some more carbs during their events. So if they're doing an endurance event, just making sure that we're supplementing with some sort of carbs during, to make sure that they keep replenishing those fuel stores so that they can stay on top of their performance. But typically, because they need such high carbs, a lot of times we'll pull back their protein just a little bit. So they're still getting enough protein and enough fat, but ample amounts of carbs to, again, fuel their training and recover. So the protein will probably get dropped a little bit for those types of athletes. Typically I'll go closer to like 1 gram per pound of like lean body mass for those athletes. So still getting enough, but definitely really focusing on the carbohydrates, and then even fat to support too, just, that's going to be another source of fuel for them.
At Exos, do you like have the chance to like work with a lot of like endurance athlete, or is it most likely to work with like NFL or like baseball players?
I think a little bit of both. I mean, our biggest programs are definitely like NFL Combine, NFL offseason, MLB offseason. But each facility is going to have kind of like different populations outside of that. So our Florida location has a huge tactical population, actually. So those guys are really fun to work with and really interesting because they, have so many different dynamics with their jobs. And then we'll get some, track and field athletes, tennis, soccer, sometimes some triathletes or those other endurance sport athletes. But, the bigger groups, I would say, would be, NFL and MLB, but we always have a variety of other athletes, which is really fun. It keeps it interesting to, make sure we're working with all different kinds of athletes, which is fun.
Yeah. So, in the performance world, we talk about like we often do something like isometric to keep their tendon healthy, or like their uh fascia, that kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
keep them healthy and be able to like transfer the force. So when it comes to like food, is there anything that's gonna help like keep their like tendon or like ligaments healthy?
Yeah, definitely. There's, different like nutrients for different types of tissue, I would say, in the body. So, we can get really specific with that as well, but I would say, just making sure any type of injury, we want to make sure that they have enough protein for sure. Protein's going to be a big one in terms of like healing and building any type of tissue. In terms of like joint healing, we want to make sure they're getting, again, same thing, like adequate protein, but also sometimes glucosamine and chondroitin. That one's like, I would say, hit or miss if it really supports. But that one could potentially help. Sometimes magnesium, that one's a little bit more specific for bone, I would say. If we're going more for like tendons and ligaments, making sure that they get enough like leucine and glutamine, which both are amino acids. So again, if they're getting enough protein overall, they're probably going to get enough leucine and glutamine. But those are two that are big with tendon and ligament like recovery. And then nitric oxide, which is common in like Beet-Elite, if you've heard of that supplement, but it's beets and spinach and things like that are really high in nitric oxide, and that's going to help support those tendons and ligaments, just getting the blood flow to those places that don't usually have a ton of blood flow there. So those nutrients are going to be really important. And then I would say like vitamin A and C are other important ones to get during like injury recovery or just like prevention of injury a little bit. I would say prevention would be more so just making sure that they're having like a well-rounded, varied diet, just on a normal basis, and to make sure that they're fueling properly and not under fueling. That's going to be kind of their biggest things to focus on for preventing injury. But then injury recovery, we want to focus on the nutrients that I just mentioned are going to be kind of the bigger ones to focus on.
Cool. So I know at like Phoenix, Arizona,
Yeah.
Exos has, when you walk into the, not really the facility, but walk into the training space, there's like
Yeah.
squat racks and like physical therapists over there. I know
Yep.
at the, I don't know if it changed, but I know at the side there's like two big like cans of like sport drinks,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how exactly do you like, if I want to like uh make it myself,
Mm-hmm.
is there like what exactly should I be putting and how to like uh is it the ratio?
Sure, that's a good question. So many like sports drinks and stuff on the market. So there's plenty of them out there that people can look at. If you're looking at pre-made sports drinks, typically I tell people to look for sure sodium's the biggest one. If you're more of a endurance athlete, definitely also want some carbohydrates in there. But even just like if you're playing any kind of sport or your practice is longer than like an hour, or maybe you're in a really hot environment, you want to make sure you're replacing those things. So general rule of thumb for that, I tell people to look for about 110 to 220 milligrams of sodium per 8-ounce serving. And then carbs, 15 to 20 grams of carbs per 8-ounce serving. So that would kind of be like the ideal thing to look at on a label. If you're going to make your own, that's totally doable. Typically, like if you do a little bit of fruit juice and like some salt, that's good too. So some people like orange juice, or some people will just eat like salted watermelon. That's a really good one. That goes over well with a lot of athletes as well, because watermelon's just like not quite as sweet. So it's easier to eat during training. But those are kind of some easy on your own kind of how to make sports drinks. But I would say typical orange juice, I would say you could do like maybe 6 ounces of orange juice would be about that 15 to 20 grams of carbs. So like 6 ounces of orange juice, add in like maybe like half to 1 teaspoon of salt. And mix that in. If you're going to dilute it, then you want to, double that amount of orange juice and dilute with water as well. But that would give you, your carbs and your sodium. So those are kind of the main two things to look for in sports drinks.
Cool.
Yeah.
When I was at Exos, like those 2 weeks, me and my friends loved that.
Yeah. The sports drinks always usually really good. They always have
Yeah,
like different flavors. It's so great.
we all have that like all the day.
Yeah. I know people like are always like, oh, I drink it all day. I'm like, maybe like while you're training.
It's so good. It's so
Yeah.
good.
Yes, definitely.
Miss that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, they always have a good one.
so that's kind of like all the questions I have for today. So
Great.
if there's like coaches or like therapists or like there's dietitian wants to reach out to you, where can they reach out to you?
So they can either email me, or I have Instagram as well. So Instagram's just Krysten, the sports RD, and Krysten's with Krysten. So Krysten the sports RD is Instagram. Email is Krysten at fuelingperformancenutrition.com. So those are probably the two best ways to contact me.
Great. So besides like San Diego and Arizona, is there other places you're gonna like other facility you're going to like go to?
Yeah, so I predominantly worked at our San Diego facility for Exos, which actually just closed at the end of November. So that's why I'll be out in Arizona for combine season, so January and February. And then from there, most likely going to branch out into private practice. I'm currently consulting with Concordia University in their athletic department, another like speed school in San Diego. So a couple of different places that I'll be working with, but kind of looking to help universities and like high schools that don't have, you know, a full-time dietitian or access to that sports nutrition specific information. So partnering with a lot of universities and schools that need that resource.
Is Speed School San Diego the one like Les Spellman work with right now?
I don't think so. I think it's a different one.
Oh,
This one's like a little bit more inland. It's Paul David is the owner, I think.
cool, cool.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.